All right, welcome everyone to today's Back on Track session. Iowa Colleague Aid and ICANN are hosting a variety of events this week to help prepare students for their post-secondary adventures. You can find a link to other sessions that are happening this week in the chat. Today we are happy to have you here and to join and listen to a demo of Tuition Fit. Our speaker for today will be Mark Salisbury. First, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. So this is a Zoom meeting, so participants are able to unmute themselves at any point if you have a question for the presenter. We do ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're speaking to prevent background noise. These sessions are all going to be recorded. And then you can ask your school counselors for the recording link beginning next week. And we'll probably also be posting them publicly for people to have access to them too. At any point, if you have a question, you can unmute and ask a question, or you can type your question in the chat box and we'll go over those towards the end or at any point that is a good stopping point during the presentation. So now we will start our session and turn it over to our speaker, Mark. Thank you, Mark.
You bet. Thanks very much. And good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see everybody join in this morning on a gorgeous fall morning over here in Davenport anyway. So what I want to do is sort of set the stage for the Tuition Fit project a little bit, and then from there go into how Tuition Fit works and how you can use it with your students, with your own college search and college planning, however it seems to fit best for your own needs. So let's just start with, kind of a big picture question. What will student success look like when you're thinking about a student going off to college? What does that look like? And I think it's important to ask that question, and because a lot of times people don't really think it through. They just sort of look at the very next thing coming up, which is, oh, here's college. And okay, let's start signing up. But college is more than that. And thinking about the college search and thinking about college success, their student success, it's not just going to college, and it's not even just finishing college, really. It's bigger than that. College is a step that sort of sets life in motion. And for that to work, one way to sort of think about the student success is on the day after college graduation and during even the whole week after college graduation. That student's in a position where there are no financial constraints. In other words, they've learned a lot in college, they've grown up a lot in college, and at this point now, they are in a position where they can take all of those skills and all of that maturation and put it toward whatever they want to put it toward, because they don't have anything holding them back. Now, unfortunately, that's a great idea in theory, but a lot of times today that's not happening. And today the biggest constraint for students is the debt that they run into after they graduate. So I think that's really important to frame this, that student success includes what happens after college, not just going to college. And so that means that the successful college search has to be framed around maximizing value and minimizing price. Because one of the things that happens here is if we don't think about it this way, we make it really difficult to achieve that after college, no financial constraints. So with that in mind, let's start by thinking about, well, how do we do it right now? How does the college search work right now? Usually, and the way I guess we've always been taught to do it, is that we start by comparing colleges. So you got two different colleges here. They both have gorgeous pictures and lighting and buildings. That's wonderful. And students start to compare colleges. And as a function of comparing and choosing to look more carefully at one particular college or another, what ends up happening is that at the same time that they pick one to look at, there's a whole bunch they choose not to look at, not because they actually did any digging, but because there's just so many colleges to look at. And students oftentimes will very quickly end up with a list of schools. And it's a lot of times schools they've heard of. And that sometimes it's the only organizing mechanism that they use to pick the schools. And you don't find out until months and months and months later that one school would offer that student a price of $10,000 a year, and another school is going to offer that student a price of $30,000 a year. And that's a huge difference. And for many students, and it could be 10,000 and 30,000, for more middle class students, it's 20,000 and 50,000. But the point is that they don't find out until much later that one school is within price range that they can manage, and another one's just way outside of what they can manage without borrowing far more than they were planning on borrowing. And this seems to be a really backwards way to do this process. Because without knowing the actual prices, we can't really compare value when we're looking at colleges, and we can't really compare return on investment, which school is actually going to pay off in a better way. And yes, return on investment's far more than just salary, but it certainly has to include the salary part of it. It certainly has to include the money part, because you're going to be paying a lot of money to go to college. And if you're going to borrow, well, then you have to pay it back. So when we operate without knowing the actual prices, when our students do that, we really increase the chance that they end up looking at schools where the prices of those institutions end up not fitting their budget. They don't find out those prices until they've already narrowed their search, and now they're stuck. Ideally, we'd like to start with price range. And it really is kind of the way we shop for lots of things, right? We figure out what our minimum and our maximum is, and it might just be as simple as anything less than, I don't know, $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year, whatever it ends up being for different students. But then what we need to be able to do is say very quickly, well, there's a whole bunch of colleges that I might get into, but they don't fit my price range. And so I really need to focus on those institutions. And when we do that, then this makes the process much simpler for students. So if you've dug into the college process at all, you're probably thinking, well, where do we find the actual pricing data? Because right now, what's only available is, publicly anyway, is the sticker price, which most students don't pay today. And then the average price, which is now just about half of the sticker price. And so if you have even minimal math chops, you figured out pretty quickly that if the sticker price is way up over the moon and the average price is in the middle, and you know some people are paying the sticker price and some people are paying nothing, then all the prices are actually all over the place in between. So that average doesn't really help you very much. So where do we find the actual pricing data so that we can identify which schools are in my price range so that I can look at them? Well, it turns out that data is not hiding in a vault somewhere. It's in the financial aid offer letters that students receive every year. So if you know how to read these things, which isn't exactly super easy, but if you know how to figure out, well, what's the actual prices of each of these institutions, and after the scholarships and financial aid, what's the price that's going to be on an individual student's bill? And then you know just a little bit about the student, their financial status generally, and their academic status. You can then organize this data in the same way that colleges organize their own pricing. And that's what we did with Tuition Fit. We said a couple of years ago, why don't we just make it possible for the public to share all this data and put it together in one place so that the public can see and compare all these prices. sort of like the way that Kelley Blue Book works if you've ever shopped for a car, or how Yelp works. By aggregating all of these reviews, you can figure out what restaurant might be worth looking at and what one might not be. So what we did was we built a way for the public to create this data set, because all those financial aid offer letters are sitting on kitchen tables and on people's portals all over the country every year. We built a way for the public to securely share that information. And securely means we redact all of the private information, we anonymize those letters so that everybody's individual information is protected and essentially stripped from the equation, so that when folks share this stuff, then they can actually start comparing the different prices that students have received at schools all over the country, and specifically the different prices that students like me, like you, have received, because you can focus this then specifically on similar students and some offers made to similar students. So what that means is you've got access to a way to really get at actual prices, not estimates, not guesses, not somebody's proprietary algorithm that you don't know how it's constructed and you certainly don't know how accurate it's going to be. Now you're looking at the actual prices that students like you have been asked to pay. So how does that really help you? Well, there's two places in the college search process where that really helps a lot. The first is that it simplifies this process. You don't have this, I'm looking at schools, but I don't know if I can afford them, so I don't really know which ones to apply to. I've heard that they give scholarships. I've heard that this other one doesn't, but I don't want to get backhanded later. So I'm nervous about diving into this thing that seems really foggy and confusing. Now we've simplified the process. So you can very simply identify, okay, these are the schools that are going to be in my price range, and students like me have been accepted to them. So I can just dive right in. The second thing that's going to happen here is now you're building a list of colleges that really are a financial fit, so that as you look further at each school and try to figure out if it fits all of the other things that are important to consider, you know that none of these schools are going to be a school that later on you find out, why did I bother looking at this? Because it's all outside of my price range in the first place. So you're building a list of schools that are going to fit your students' financial situation. Third, you're making decisions with real data. This is one of the biggest concerns for the public, is not being able to make decisions with real data sets up all kinds of dynamics within families, between a student and counselors, where emotions can just run rampant because that school just looks gorgeous, or I've heard wonderful things, or I had a family friend who went there, or vice versa. I know somebody else who hated it there, right? All of these things that are just driven by emotion. Now you're gonna be able to make decisions with real data. And finally, you can use Tuition Fit to help get a better final price. Because at the end of this process, when students have received award letters, most colleges now are more than happy to listen to and respond positively to an appeal for more money. We might call it negotiating, although colleges don't like to call it that. But today, most colleges absolutely will negotiate a final price, because that's the position that they're in. They need students. And with the Tuition Fit data, you are far more able to know the context, to have leverage, and to be an informed consumer. So you actually are on an even playing field with the colleges that you're talking to. And saving a couple $1,000s a year, that makes a big difference. So let's look at the two stages where Tuition Fit really helps. The first is at that early stage. Yes, students start with thousands of colleges that they could go look at, and that's really overwhelming for obvious reasons. Now you're asking students to narrow from that sort of huge list of colleges, most of which they've never heard of, to a set of colleges that you're going to dive in more closely and really think about, maybe even visit some campuses. At that early stage of building a college list, you really want that list of schools to be a group that all meet a sort of basic criteria so that it's actually worth looking more closely at each of those schools. So how do you use Tuition Fit to build a college list? Well, it sets you up to make sure that you're looking at schools in your price range. And it really makes sure that everybody involved, which oftentimes is family, is on the same page, because you're using data to inform that process. So if you start by saying, well, I just want to look at the colleges that I can afford or in my price range or fit my budget, whatever term you want to use, you set up a Tuition Fit account and you have free access to build a list of schools from the prior year's data. So all of the data that's been shared with Tuition Fit, which at this point is about 18,000 prices from different students all over the country at different colleges all over the country. All you have to do is to plug in some basic demographics, an unweighted high school GPA, an EFC, expected family contribution. That's that sort of number that comes from the FAFSA, that you need to have that long before the FAFSA becomes available in a couple of weeks here. So you can use a FAFSA estimator there's lots of them out there. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, but they're all based on the same formula. You need to get a sense of what colleges are going to see is your expected family contribution, because they use that as a proxy for financial status. So if you have those two numbers and just a couple of other basic demographics, you can then use Tuition Fit. You create that account, you plug that information in, and you'll get a list of colleges that then you can filter by price range and see, here's a list of schools that we know last year offered students just like you, students with a similar financial status and a similar academic status, a price in this particular demo in the range of $15,000 or less. And that is not the sticker price. That's after scholarships and financial aid. And I should mention, because lots of people wonder about this, we throw out all of the stuff in the financial aid offer letters that are sort of famous for being misleading. So if there's a plus loan woven into an award letter here, which happens all the time, we pull that out. If there's work study woven into that loan or into that award letter, we pull that out. Not because the work study is a bad thing, but neither of those two things are guaranteed, first of all. People can get denied for a plus loan. And work study, just because it exists, doesn't mean that there is a job for that student. What we're trying to get to is what's the actual price on that bill when students who chooses to go to that school, if the student chooses to go to that school, what's the price that's going to be on that bill in the fall? Because that's what people want to know. So from this tool, from Tuition Fit, just creating a free account, you can immediately find a list of schools that will fit your price range. And we know it because we have the data to back it up. Now, it's a crowdsourced tool, so it's not a given that every college in the country is in the data set for every different type of student. But the purpose here is not to go shop by colleges, it's to shop by price, to confine that list so that you're sure to be looking at schools that fit the price range. And oftentimes you can look at a list that comes out of Tuition Fit and start to get a sense of the kinds of schools you might want to look at, even if the individual schools that are in your area might not be on there. So oftentimes, if someone needs to get that list of colleges down to, I don't know, $10,000 or less, and they're a above average student, but not over the moon, you're going to see a bunch of regional public institutions like in Northern Iowa, or even a community college like a Kirkwood. And you'll see some small private colleges, but you certainly won't see some of the big brand names and some of the flagships. And that is the purpose of this tool, to give you a list of colleges that work for sure, and then give you a way to see the kinds of colleges that you might add to this group. Now, it is possible because this is where early in the search process at this point, and the premise of Tuition Fit is if you have an award letter to share, it's free to see. So we're talking about at a stage where you don't have award letters yet. You're at the beginning of the college search. So we made this part of it free. And if somebody wants to see all of the granular pricing data that goes with this stuff, sometimes that's valuable. You can purchase that access. It's a $49 charge, just a one-time charge. But frankly, most students don't need that. They just need to find schools that are in their price range so that they can focus their efforts and they know that the schools they're looking at are going to in fact be in their price range if they get in. So that's how tuition fit works at that early stage. The second place that tuition fit is really important is at the end of the process, because believe it or not, these two stages are the stages where you really can impact your cost. The list of schools that you choose to look at more seriously, more in depth, if you pick a list of schools that are going to charge you the full sticker price, that really directly impacts your final cost because you've spent all your time focusing on those schools at the expense of any others. So you've started your process by making sure you're looking at schools that fit your general price range. And then at the end of the process, today, it is completely different than it was decades ago when you got your award letter, that was your price, and you'd better have a tremendously unique and very compelling case to even think about appealing. Fast forward to 2021, and most schools welcome the appeal, welcome the request for a better financial aid package, and offer it. And in the next hour, I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But in this session, trust me, we've seen this over and over and over. Colleges are now more than willing to negotiate or respond positively to appeals because they need students. That's just the reality that they're facing. So these two stages are the stages where you can really impact the final price. And part of the whole reason we're talking about this, and part of the whole reason we built Tuition Fit, was because we need to help more students find the schools that fit their price range so that they can not only see themselves there and follow through with the process to go to college, but then they're more able and more likely to continue and finish because financial issues don't come up and catch them around the ankle and eventually they have to quit midway through college, and they're in that worst possible position of some debt but no degree. So we need to take advantage of all of the opportunities that we have to make price come down for these students. And this second stage is a critical stage where I know it sounds like almost like an infomercial, but it really is true. It's regularly the case that students request a better financial aid package and get $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 off over 4 years just by asking for it. Believe it or not, just by asking for it. So how does Tuition Fit work at this stage? It's really a pretty simple share and compare and be a part of a cooperative. The students, when they've received financial aid award offers, and they share those offers to Tuition Fit. It's really as simple as just taking a picture of it, scanning it, uploading it after you've created an account. And then because you've shared information to the data set, because you've plugged it in there, you can compare with the hundreds, sometimes thousands of other offers for free. You chose to participate as a student, you're in, that's it. Doesn't cost you a dime. But you have to share in order to compare. And that's the principle of crowdsourcing and the principle of this whole project is we collaboratively solve this lack of price transparency ourselves just by sharing information. Tuition Fit redacts all of the private information. Everything's totally anonymized, and students and users, you get to actually have the sort of last say. You get to see the redacted version of your award letters before they go into the system. If you see something that we missed or you're not comfortable, you can actually pull that letter. It's built so that you, the students, have the final say, because this really is a trust exercise. So what it looks like then for a student, and this is a demo from a student a year ago, is it plays out like this, and it's really not super complicated, but it can be really a big change. This is a student that applied to these 4 schools. They happen to be an Illinois resident, but they applied to 3 schools here in Iowa, and then 1 school sort of just over the border and then a little way south. And those are the 4 prices that they got. You can see the sticker prices were, and you can see that the student got a lot of financial aid from everybody. But at this point, the student says, well, if cost is the biggest thing, then there's only 1 school in here that's even close. Can't really use these other offers to leverage a better price. So I'm sort of stuck. And I can ask for more money, but I can hope. And this was pre-pandemic, so things were just a little bit different than they are now. But because they shared the data to Tuition Fit, well, now here's a whole bunch of offers that students just like her, meaning a similar EFC and a similar GPA and test score in this case, that they shared to Tuition Fit. And right away, she noticed that the difference between Southern and Northern is about $2,500. Well, now knowing that information, that makes a big difference. And in fact, if you look carefully on the far right side of the display here, you see this little icon. And that is an icon that basically you could click on it and then you could see the redacted version of that award letter. You actually can see it, and you can check our math if you want. Well, as a function of that, this student saw these 2 things and made a couple of calls, called Southern, called Northern. She hadn't applied to Northern for no real good reason. She just hadn't. And a couple of phone calls later and some thinking, and she's now saving $10,000 over 4 years to go to college, just because she saw this information. Without it, she wouldn't have been able to see it. So that's how Tuition Fit works. And it's built on, let's make the consumer more powerful and more capable to solve this price transparency problem ourselves together, and then as a function of that, help students both early and then late. So at this point now, the student can be a lot more confident in their final decision, and they can start to think about, well, how do I compare? How do I look at these prices? How do I put this data that I'm seeing into context? So the first thing is just generally looking at, well, how do these prices compare to the offers that other students have gotten from other schools? And then how does my price compare to offers from similar schools? And that's exactly what I just showed you. So I want to show you some more comparisons that we've just seen in the last year. This was a student that applied to several schools and uploaded all those award letters. And one was from Monmouth University, by the way, not the little Monmouth College just across the border in Illinois. And we can see that the sticker price was $55,000, but their price was a lot less. But in the comparison set, they see another one, and that price is pretty close, but a little bit different. Well, now the students got some information to call and ask the financial aid office and try to figure out, well, what's the difference here? And they can sort of parse it. Another example is the student that applied to Rider, and they have a price, and there's 2 prices down here from Rider that are really different. And from this information, you can see that at Rider University, that prices are malleable. Prices are not all set in stone. And this student has now a lot of leverage that they didn't have to be able to say, if I'm going to talk to Monmouth and I'm going to talk to Rider, I have some context now to bring to that conversation. So the Tuition Fit site is tuitionfit.org. And there are a bunch of different videos on the How It Works tab to help students set up accounts. And to help counselors use Tuition Fit with their students. And I will talk about that just briefly here in just a second. But you can go to Tuition Fit, how it works, and you can really walk through all of the different ways that the tool can help you as a student and help you as a counselor working with students. And the biggest way that it helps counselors is because you can link a counselor's account, and counselors can create a free account as well, and then link their account with any of their students. And by doing so, be able to see what those students are seeing so that you can provide and help those students make some better choices about, okay, here's a bunch of schools that are in your price range, but which ones of them would be a better fit to look more thoroughly at, to dig more deeply. And especially in the days now where a lot of the stuff we do, sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's in person, sometimes it changes week to week. You can use this tool now to meet with students virtually and be looking at the same stuff and be talking about the same information because you're both looking at it. And you can find a video about how that sets up at the tuitionfit.org page. So what I thought I would do now is just pause here, and I suspect that there are lots of questions. So I thought I'd pause and just give people a chance to unmute themselves, ask a question. If they don't want to do it that way, they can just stick the question in the chat. But really, any question that you have about Tuition Fit, about how it works, about pricing, glad to answer them. Fire away.
I have a question.
Yes.
If a student is basically interested in large public, like Iowa State, South Dakota, SDSU, and then looking at Nebraska, so like those major institutions, is it worth it to do something like this? Because can you even really negotiate or, affect change much? Or is this more beneficial for when you're looking at private schools?
That's a great question. One of the things that has happened over the past 20 years is it used to be that you could pretty much assume that public institutions were, one, cheaper than private schools, and two, were more locked into pricing, that like it was algorithmic and that was sort of set, and there really wasn't a lot of wiggle room. But what has happened at the public institutions is, and this is particularly so when you're looking at public institutions out of state, is public institutions started to see that out of state student revenue as, we have more wiggle room with that pricing than we do in state. So one, we're going to be more interested in recruiting students from out of state. And then two, we'll do things with out of state students that just look almost exactly like the private institutions. We'll set that out of state price higher, but then we'll be much more willing to bring merit scholarships into the game that will help to reduce that cost. Sometimes those schools would also sort of, across different states, will sort of join a compact where they would sort of do a tuition waiver for out-of-state students if you wanted to go from, I know Minnesota and Wisconsin have had one of those for a very long time. And many of them are sort of slightly different, where they won't give you the in-state price in that state, but they'll give you sort of something less than the full out-of-state. But that increase between in-state and out-of-state is a space in which there's a lot more wiggle room. And so as a function of that, you can absolutely use Tuition Fit, and I would really encourage you to use it, because if you're looking at any out-of-state publics, they are going to sort of approach the process with you very similarly to the way that private institutions do, where we've set this really high price and then we've got more wiggle room. We don't want to, we'd prefer not to have to go below in-state, but the bigger that wiggle room is, the more room they have to give out merit aid at the front end, and then to offer scholarships and additional little bits of money to try to get you to close the deal. Does that help to answer your question, Christy?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
And are you giving another session, the negotiating one?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So you'll talk more about the merit and scholarships and things like that then?
Yes, we'll talk a lot more about sort of the inner workings of how negotiating works, because it's just, well, I'm giving the presentation, so I'm going to sound like it's the really coolest thing ever, but it really is this really wild, like behind the curtain, it's totally different than what one might think. But to the question you had about the public institutions, tuition fit really works well there, just like private institutions, because even within state, there's wiggle room. There's not as much, but there is. And what the college might think, like, for example, Iowa State, we've seen a lot of folks call Iowa State and get a little bit more money. And when I say a little bit, I'm just using that phrase sort of with quotes, like from the perspective of Iowa State's budget. So their big, massive, hundreds of millions of dollars of budget as an institution. They say, well, okay, we'll give you $1,000 a year more in scholarship money if that helps to make it work. For them, that's like tossing you a quarter. For you, $1,000 a year for 4 years, we could do something with that, right? So it's this sort of version of perspective where for them it's not that much money, but for you it's a lot. And so even in the in-state, there's still some wiggle room that they have that you'll only find out about if you see what other students like your student have been asked to pay, and you have other offers that then you can compare and contrast. And you can use this information to then just be a more informed consumer. What other questions do people have?
Yeah. Other questions?
You can plug them into the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and launch into it. And I'm more than happy to talk about any other details and pricing stuff. One of the benefits of this project has been seeing thousands and thousands of financial aid offer letters, seeing how different institutions sort of design those letters, understanding how different organizations, different colleges sort of think about pricing, and how that information has moved over time. One thing that we saw over the past year, a lot of people ask this question, is so how have prices changed because of COVID and the pandemic? And honestly, the prices overall don't look like they've changed that much. But within that overall, there's all kinds of really interesting things that have changed. And some institutions have really added a bunch more financial aid in the last 2 years. And other institutions have said, you know what, we're not going to do anything different. And a lot of that's about supply and demand. A lot of that is about public and private. But a lot of that is just different institutions trying to figure out, how do we survive this thing? And in the end, the tuition fit data has become just as useful as it always has, because you don't know which school is going to do what. Let's see here. I see one question in the chat. Is there any expense to using tuition fit as a student? When you're early in the college search process and you're just trying to build a list of schools, you can use tuition fit at 2 tiers. You can use it for free, and the free service essentially allows you to just set a price range, whatever you decide it should be for your own, or that student's own question. They sort of need to figure out, well, is $5,000 a year my ceiling? Is $20,000 a year my ceiling? Talk about it with family and whoever else that they need to talk it through with. And then once they've set that, you'll be able to get a list of schools that fit that criteria, and that list is entirely free. If the student wanted to go in and see the award letters that came from, sort of how those offers are constructed, all of those details, that's a $50 charge or $49 charge, and it's just a one-time charge to see that data as long as you want to use it. So it's just once, and then for the entire next however long it is from when that student sets up a tuition fit account to when they go off to college, they've got access to that data. At the later stage, when you're receiving award letters and you start wanting to compare that stuff, that part of tuition fit is entirely free because it's share information so that you can see information. One little trick that I am more than happy to share is there are lots of colleges now that do what's called rolling admissions, and you can apply to those schools early in the fall, even now. And they'll turn around a decision for you in the middle of October, early November. So as soon as you get that decision, you upload that to Tuition Fit. And now as soon as you've uploaded it, you can see all of the pricing information as a high school senior while you're deciding other schools to apply to, while you're looking at whether we want to appeal and for how much and how do we want to. You get to see all of that, and you can see it all the way through the college search process, high school graduation, the summer before college. You can see it all the way through. So it really is advantageous to apply to a school that does rolling admissions and turns around decisions early. And you can find out those schools by just Googling which schools have rolling admissions. And there's lots of people who've keep a list of what those schools are. And then just upload that stuff and you're in, and you can see it all the way through. What other questions do anybody have?
Or do Iowa State, like since we're in Iowa State, UNI, do they have that rolling admissions, early admissions?
We have seen decisions come from the University of Iowa and get uploaded as early as Halloween, believe it or not. We have seen offers from Northern Iowa a little bit later. And the schools sometimes change their dates in which they start sending out the earliest ones from year to year. But Iowa, Iowa State, Northern Iowa, none of those are schools that wait until March to send their decisions out. None of them are. So when those would turn around, I don't know this year, but my experience with all three of them is that they are in some way, some version of rolling admission.
Jamie put in the chat box that University of Iowa's admission deadline is November 1st.
Mm-hmm. So this is another thing that's very interesting. Schools will do lots of different things to try to get more applications early, because that allows them to do more things with knowing how many students they have at what point and what things they need to do to fill their class. It used to be that when schools set deadlines like early admission November 1st, get those applications in and we'll turn them around. In this particular case, if you get your application in early, they'll turn it around very quickly because they want you to have a decision back. So there's one example of rolling admission. But one of the other things underneath this that's not so true, or not so well known, but is very true, is that even though these schools post these deadlines, in many cases, you can still apply because they still need students. And so when a school posts the deadlines for application, maybe it's not the early decision, maybe it's regular decision. you can still apply after those dates to many colleges because they simply need students. And today, most colleges and universities are taking students, taking applications all the way through the summer because they have to. So when you see these deadlines for early admission, one, that tells you how soon they'll turn them around, because early admission and early decision and early action, different phrases you'll hear, those are all predicated on giving you a decision earlier. But what they also shouldn't be interpreted to mean that if you don't apply by that deadline, somehow then that school is completely full and there's no chance.
All right. Any other questions for Mark at all? If not, I would just like to remind everybody that we still have sessions for the back and track events going on tomorrow too. If you are interested in those, please sign up with the link that's just been put in the chat box. You can register for the rest of the sessions on there. And then there will be the recording for these will be shared again with school counselors, and then will be later made public. You can access them probably starting next week. We would like to thank all of our partners who were able to make this event possible. And lastly, this Sunday, there's the Golden Circle College and Career Fair is happening from 1 to 3 p.m. in Altoona. If you are interested in learning more about that or attending, there's a link for that also in the chat box. Please check that out. We would like to thank Mark today for joining us and giving us a demonstration of Tuition Fit. We learned a lot today and we appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us.